Again, an introduction. I am Kanishka from Swift Anytime. I'm your host today. I'm going to share about some cool Swift UI, like the core fundamental stuff, uh, along with how like a lot of stories from WDC since I attended it in 2019. So I have some stories to share. I have also stories to share about how Swift UI works in production. Some may be embarrassing, but some are cool ones. Uh, so I guess before we start, let's get a official introduction, and the summit can go.
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, welcome to the stream. We are gonna talk about much more interesting stuff today in this event. So yeah, a little bit about me. I'm Amit Samant. I'm also an WWDC scholar, and I'm a iOS developer and working in iOS development since 2018. That's about me. I'm currently working in framework team at Gojek. So yeah, that's that, and I'm also a technical writer at Swift Anytime. I hope you guys enjoy the session. Yeah, to you, to you, Kanishka.
Okay, just icebreaker question. Amit, Swift UI or UIKit if you have to pick one?
Okay, it's a hard question. It depends of lots of complicated decisions, like mostly related to how the business operates, because it's not about us developers who likes the frameworks more. Obviously, if I had to tell about which framework I do like the most, that will be Swift UI. But yeah, I still think like due to limitation of support, like the platform support that we need to provide to the users, UIKit is still at its best. I hope that in like upcoming years or so, the iOS version adoption, maybe maybe 100% of iOS 14 or 15, then we may be able to use Swift UI in production in full force.
Yes, yes. A great answer. So, okay, before we start, also just continuing on that topic, what factors do you think are important for deciding whether to go for UIKit or Swift UI?
Yeah. So first and foremost, what kind of platform support your app needs? It depends. If your business supports need to support devices older than iOS 13, then SwiftUI is not an option. Though if your app supports iOS 13 and above, still you need to think before adopting SwiftUI. As we all know, at time of iOS 13, SwiftUI was not that stable or you know mature enough. So that's that.
Yes.
If I have to pick a framework for development and developing an app, I would first see what my audience is, and if that audience is already like very keen to use the latest software and stuff, basically iOS 14 and 15 above, if that's the data says, then I would surely use Swift UI. But
Yes.
in case on the contrary, if my user base which I am targeting are most likely to likely to update their phones, so I would go
Yes.
for UIKit still.
Yes. That's a good explanation. I guess with that being said, we could start with a Swift UI fundamental session. So we are going to talk about a lot of like things. Let's start with, I guess we both introduced ourselves. And okay, before we like dive into the fundamentals and everything, let's start with like the launch of Swift UI. It was launched in 2019 at WWDC session, like WWDC event, and I still remember like I attended that session. I attended the WWDC live since I was a scholar, and Craig Federighi talked about different what we have been using for Vue so far, like for UI building. He talked about UI kit and everything, and then he was like, "We have a new framework, Swift UI," and there was a solid applause for like half or like 1 minute. All the developers were screaming, shouting, like everyone was so excited. People wanted to go for uh they immediately when they came out of the hall, they were like, "We gotta go for the beta version to try this." And it's like usually, as far as I've seen in offline WWDC events, before like half a month or a month of when they start hosting it, they put out some sessions and labs that the people who are going to attend can see. So it can be like a, usually like what we see on TV is or YouTube is one session, but it's actually a week of sessions where all the developers come and they interact with the Apple engineers. They ask their questions, and that in during that 1 week, all the sessions are recorded, which you could see on the Apple developer app. So during that time, for like before half a month of the WWDC 19, the sessions and labs are out, so people could book it and they could attend it at during the week. And that time, half of the sessions, like the name were not written. They were mysterious. Like Apple, like used the emoji, like that emoji everywhere. They are like, we will tell you what it is on the event day. And then SwiftUI was launched, and it was like a game changer. Like you could see how it has evolved in last 2 3 years, and people have been using it for production now, including me. So yeah, so let's they that week they conducted a lot of sessions and labs, and people were so excited considering it was so declarative. Like coming from UIKit, the best advantage would be how easy to use it is. But I mean that also comes with a cost. Like there are some limitations, and it can't be pixel perfect sometimes. So we are going to talk about that later on. Let's continue with that. So in today's session, we are going to talk with some fundamental things. So first, we'll go for property wrappers. Like there are different property wrappers. So we like I see it's used everywhere, but nobody actually talks about what's the actual difference between state or binding, or between what's actually why do we use environment object, or why do state object works for refreshing the view so well. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some UI elements and like how they are compared to UIKit and how it's better. We can also go over a little about view modifiers, since I mean it's core part of stylizing all the views that we build. And at final, I'll share a very quite embarrassing but funny story from the from production when I built an app with SwiftUI, and it didn't go too well, and that teaches us a lesson. But that's for the last. So let's go for the property wrappers first. So the state, I guess this is one thing you see literally everywhere. The most inevitable thing. Like when you start, this is the one thing we always go for. So this is as you can guess, it's the most fundamental property wrapper you use for saving values and changing them. It basically has, if we actually look up the documentation, it has two properties: wrapped and projected values. Now, if I could explain that, that would be a pretty deep conversation. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm putting it out here. This could be used for like some special cases where you want like wrapped value of a state, but we could discuss it in another session. Uh, it helps in reloading the view, and that is for a reason. Like SwiftUI, the views are struct based, so for changing the like a particular thing in the view, we would have to change the value, and that is why state is used a lot. Like if I want to change something in the view, I would have to completely change a particular value, and that is how the view will update. So that's why property wrappers, this property wrapper is used a lot. And if you check the documentation, even Apple says that whenever this is used, keep all your like the state variables private. Like in a view, if you have like different like state variables of like showing a view or hiding something, like hiding a particular alert or something, if possible, you gotta keep it private to that view. Like you don't want that it's shared to other views. So it's one of the best practices. Always keep your state variables private. Next, I guess. So yes, another thing we use a lot in this is in Swift is binding. So it's as I mean, I've in all the terms we talk, we take a lot of the phrases from the Apple documentation and as described in a in Apple documentation, it says that bindings are two-way connection. Like a view reads it and writes to it, and it's a connection from the view and value. And the best way I can explain it is like whenever there's an alert and it's like is presented value, it could the how we change that value fundamentally is binding you like in the previous example. Like if I want to show or hide a view, it basically is presented and I change it. So that is how the view communicates. Wait, that's the slide. Yes. So the view communicates with the view, and the value communicate with the binding. And this is how the changes go. And I believe most of the other property wrappers are just some other version of the state variable. So this is just a state variable. Like it would be rare if you see changing the binding, like self dot this binding variable equals to something. It's mostly the view writing to it. Like you can't. It's rare that you see that you're directly changing the binding value. So yes, it's about the binding. And talking about the core changes. Wait. Yeah, here. So talking about the core like fundamental differences between state and binding, I would say is the ownership. Even like again, another thing we quoted from the documentation. It's the views are owned by, I mean, the state variables are owned by the view. And that's why we could reconstruct the views and change it. And that's why it's stored in the memory of the view. But when it comes to binding, it's not particularly owned by something. It's just for reading and writing the values. And that is why mostly this is used for sharing data between like some view or like style modifier. Like if I want to have a picker and I want to have store the current selected thing. Like if there's a picker to pick the meeting time, I want to store that value. That is where you go for the binding. It's like value writing, reading writing thing. So yes, that is about the state and binding variable. There are environment objects, like things we talked about earlier, state based. Now, when sharing objects between the view, like if I want to share some data and between a couple of view, what I could go for is state variable. But what if there's something like, let me give you an example for real life question. So recently I worked on this fitness virtual app, completely built in SwiftUI. And what we had to do is we had to pass this array of sessions, array of objects containing all the data about each session from like to all the views. And those are decoded from a JSON at the start of the app. So how would I do that? How will I share that array of object to all the views? So that is where we use environment object. I mean, I could still use a state variable, but imagine passing down one object for more than 3 to 4 objects. Like one for 3 to more than 3 to okay, I meant 3 to 4 views. Like there are 4 or 5 views, and you are sharing that one same object that is for use go for environment object. That would be the best practice. Yes, so that was about environment object.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty nice tip to have. Like if we have 3 or more objects or more views that consumes the same data, we should use the environment object rather than passing bindings or any state variables. So that's a good tip to have.
Yes, just a minute. AirPods dead. Got it.
Cool, sir. Kanishka, you are not audible.
Okay, wait.
Wait, you are audible now.
Okay, that's great. So let's get back to UI views, the UI components, the core thing about SwiftUI that everyone likes. So before we start on this, we gotta get clear on this one thing. Let's get this one fact clear, that classes are reference types and struct are value types. Oops. Wait. Yes, I lost that. Okay, here. So classes are reference type and struct are value types. So I guess Amit could go ahead and just clear this up as a fundamental.
Yeah, sure. So basically, what it means, like classes, when we create an object of them and we store it in a variable, the variable actually reference to an memory location. And whenever we assign that variables to a second variable, rather than making a copy of that instance, what it does, Swift internally, it attach that reference to that other variable. So once we change the second variable, it also changes the first. That is the whole value reference type thing. Now, in respect to that, how structs work is when we create an object of struct and we create another variables and we assign that to that struct instance to that variable, it get copied once we mutate that second object. So when you mutate that second object, the first object keeps unaffected. So that's how this struct and classes differs from each other. Now, why we are talking about classes and struct in a Swift UI tutorials, the more you will know about it from Kanishka.
Yes. And just adding to that point, let me give another example of reference type and values type, even easier one. So let's consider a real life example. There's a coffee cup object and there's some coffee in it. Let's let's consider that object is a class and I give one to my friend. And since classes, that object, that coffee cup is a class, if I share it to a friend, if they drink the coffee, the amount of coffee in my cup will reduce too. Because they're reference type, they both are referring to the same address in the memory. So both of our coffee quantity will be affected. But if they are struck, again, I have the same coffee cup, it's a struck, and I give it to my friend, they drink it too. The quantity of coffee in my cup would be exactly the same, but for them it would be reduced. So I guess that would make it a little easier to like understand, a more realistic way to understand. So
That's a
no,
great
not coffee.
example. That's a great example. Though I would not share my coffee with any of you guys.
Yes, it's a developer fuel that's like
Yep.
powered by coffee.
Yep.
So now the reason why we talked about it is for understanding the key differences between UIKit and SwiftUI and why it is the way it is. Like uh, SwiftUI views, if you see, they're completely struct based. Like when you define a view, it defines a new struct. And since we talked earlier that here that structs are value types, to change the view in like wait, let me restart. Let me rephrase it. So if there's a Swift UI view and I want to change certain thing, like certain, if there's a text and I want to change the content of the text, what I would have to do is I would have to change the value it is dependent on. Like if this would be UIKit, which is mostly object based, I would say I could go for like the label.text equal to something. But since this is Swift UI, what I would have to do is I have to define a state variable, I have to pass
Yes.
it on to the text, and then I would have to change it. And I guess the core reason it is that way is because Swift UI is struct based and they are dependent on the values. So yes, that is one thing. And another core difference I could talk about is, I guess Amit could go ahead for this.
Yeah, you must have also noticed this pattern that when we are creating any kind of views in UIKit, they are generally of type classes. Rather, if we want to create a view in SwiftUI, we can create a class for a view in SwiftUI, but generally it is recommended that we use struct for our views. So, that does mean that SwiftUI prefers that its views to be a struct so that they are immutable, and UIKit prefers that the views of there are mutable and can be referenced back. Cause how UIKit renders the views in a view hierarchy is it creates keeps the reference of its child views in the parent view. So one example could be you have this view controller where you have the main view, then whenever you need to add some views onto it, you will need to call like vc.view.add subview. While we do this add subview thing, UIKit keeps a reference of that view to draw on the view hierarchy. But in case of SwiftUI, it does not work that way. SwiftUI uses this struct, instantiate this struct, and get the view from its body property and render it directly, and then after that the struct is destroyed. Only the state variables and binding variables are kept in the memory. So that's the one reason that SwiftUI, for the like performance that it provides in terms of memory, it uses struct.
Yes, that was a great explanation. Also, if you are finding some value, make sure to maybe take a note or maybe save few of these like the slides. That would be really helpful, like understanding the core value. Like you could look back to it later and be like, yes, this is now I know why it is the way it is. So yeah, I guess we talked about that. So yeah, this is the like one example I wanted to give, like how UIKit is based, like it's, I would say it's like kind of based on objects, not completely, but if you see like the buttons and like the UI view, they are all an object class. So if I want to reference it back, if there's a view I want to change the background color, I could basically reference it back anywhere. And this is what, you know, people would prefer UIKit over SwiftUI, maybe because of this reason. Because if I want a very complex view and I want to change the, like change some certain values at like the given time, at SwiftUI you would have to figure out some like really like out of the box ways to do it. Maybe you could use combine, or you would have to like play around with the variables or the value variables and do it. And in UIKit it's so easy. You could just be like self.view.background color, like, and just add it, change this value.
Yeah, I guess you are most more liking the imperative way of coding, and SwiftUI is more like declarative way of coding. So on declarative way, you will need some kind of state or some kind of binding on function of which our view state changes. Basically, if we change a value, then only our view change. So yeah, it's a paradigm shift for sure. Though my preference is more like of declarative coding rather than imperative.
Right. That's, I mean, that also depends on what type, like how complex the view is, or
Yeah.
what kind of perfection are we looking for. Like here, there's an example. There's a text and I want to change the value. Like, what I could do, like I have to trigger a certain like event in order to change it. Like here, that event is on tap gesture. I would add something to the text, so the text content could be changed. So yes, this is how UIKit and SwiftUI are fundamentally different based on like the classes and struct level. So let's move on to the views. I guess these are like pretty cool and so easy to build. Like everyone likes it. It's like rainbows and roses. So easy to use until you have to do some complex task. Then then life becomes hell, and you gotta use combine and some complex environment object and stuff. So I guess let's talking more doing about the views. There are different stacks, and I believe these are like the fundamental way to have certain type of layout in your view. Like, like in web development, they say div are key to everything. Like you could make a lot of stuff. Like you could make boxes, you could make perfect sections just with divs. I believe these are the divs of SwiftUI. Also, I would like to know how many of you have done web development before, like maybe before this, or you do web development along with iOS development. So feel free to write that in chat. Let's see how many web/app developers are here. So talking about this, these are like the fundamental way to build blocks, like build views in SwiftUI. And as the name suggests, V stacks, like vertical stacks, you could stack up the views like in a vertical manner, and same for a horizontal view, it's in a horizontal way. And Z stack are in like a 3D space, like you could see in the third picture of different colors. What we have is different colors stacked up over each other in a 3D coordinate. So these are like the fundamental views you're going to use a lot in like production and even in general. Next, okay, just ignore this text. The like divs in HTML got some blunder here, but about text, like these are like UI, these are equivalent to like UI labels in UIKit. So what we basically have is we could save text, we could show certain type of text, and if you like you could perform basically all the things you could do in UIKit. Like in UIKit there was attributed string thing, where if I want some certain font style triggered for some certain string, a certain font string, I could do that. Like what if I want hello to be red and world to be orange in the same text? That would use the attributed string. You could go for the same here, and like you could do basically everything that you could do in UIKit. You could add like background color, foreground color. You could change the font color. You could add like boldness, italic, like all those changes, font weight. You could do everything here. That's basically equivalent to UIKit in that case. Then there are buttons. Again, this basically does everything that UIKit does. You could make all the changes. But I believe one thing that I really want to highlight in this one is the styles. Like Apple, if I don't know if you all have read the human interface guidelines, so feel free to share in the chat if you did. They say like if you want to create a really native and smooth experience, always go for these native styles. And in SwiftUI, you could like it's so easy to integrate any style. Like if over a text, if you want some kind of style, just write dot text style and you would get an enum of lot of styles. Same for any picker, like just write picker dot style, and if you click if you check the enum, you would have tons of style and people don't even know about it. So it's always cool to use the like the native SwiftUI viewless style, like just and here I also want to talk about emphasis. I also want to give emphasis to the human interface guideline. Like you could have a better UI and Apple giving more importance to your apps on the App Store just by having a more native like Apple like UI. And moreover, it makes easy for the user too, since they are familiar with that here. And again, if you're going for SwiftUI and building apps in production, it would be so cool to have these styles. Like you don't even have to go for like background, like for button style bordered prominent. You don't even have to give a background and frame and padding. It's just right there. You could give that to it. So yes, those were buttons, and we also talked about some human interface guidelines. There are also labels. Okay, wait. Okay, with that we gotta talk about SF symbols. Like they were launched like around like 2019, 2032, and it makes the iconography so easy. And one thing I want to point out is how SwiftUI and even UIKit for that matter treats that as a font. Like I could literally define an image with system name initializer, and I could change the font. I could give it basically use all the style modifiers that can be used on font. So I mean that's a unique thing I want to point out here about SF symbols and how they are emphasized.
They're actually pretty cool. Like whenever you apply on font size and you kind of go to the accessibility and change the size, they grow with it, because we are using font for defining our sizes. I find it very amusing.
And it also gives a very native experience again.
Yeah.
Emphasis on how native UI can be better. And with that, I mean, since we talked about text and SF symbols, there comes labels. Again, I believe this is something unique to SwiftUI. Like you wouldn't find that in UIKit, something like you could add SF symbol and a text together. Like what I say is it's basically replacement of an H tag with text and label. But the best thing about it is like if there's a whole label like with system image and the text, if I want to change the font of all like both of the elements, I could just be like font size is large title and it would be bigger, and I could make all those changes, and it's applied like equally on both of that. So this something unique to SwiftUI, which makes life easier. Oh, then there are navigation controls. Well, I have quite mixed feelings about it, saying from experience. Uh, so like navigation controllers, like in SwiftUI, like you could be like navigation view, and you could define all that. Like you could have views inside of it. You could perform like navigation links via navigation link command. But here is, I believe, is one of the, what do you say, something that people are hesitant about it, but using navigation view, because it's limited. Like you can't be like pop to the root view. Like if you would have used UIKit, you would know. Like you could literally just pop to the home view by just one command. In SwiftUI, there's like nothing like that. There's a lot of limitation. Like I saw some tweets about developers making apps in SwiftUI. They're like, the one thing that's stopping me from doing this is navigation controller. Like the navigation view in SwiftUI. It's limited. And I mean, when basically the whole flow of your app is dependent on like some that navigation controller, I mean, that would definitely make you not use SwiftUI, because since again the limitations.
Yeah.
But if it yes.
Yeah, yeah, I also find navigation controllers very, hard to use, because they are very, strongly coupled with the thing that they will need to trigger from an state variable also. So they will have to be inside our view's body itself to be able to operate. So like we are so used to in UIKit to have in common navigation logic which can navigate to each and every part of our apps, that when it comes to SwiftUI and navigation in SwiftUI, it becomes very cumbersome to do the programmatic navigation. That is also like one of the points for which like I wouldn't use SwiftUI in production right now.
Yes. And for that, I guess I had the same issue when I was working with on that app I talked about earlier, the virtual fitness app, completely based in SwiftUI. So I found a solution, like using some UI application and like UI window level stuff, and figuring out the routes navigation control and then using it. But definitely, it is not reliable to have like a very, what do you say, like complex app with a custom navigation flow. With this, you gotta find some way out, and it will going to trouble you in like future when you're going for more complex UI styles. Another thing, again, tab views basically works just like in UIKit. You could also build a carousel with it, and you could also have these tabs where you could change. You could have different views in each tab and build native experience. Pretty easy to use. Okay, wait. So here I have a story to share. I guess I'm done with sharing about UI views. I mean SwiftUI views and how they are different. Like how they are different. SwiftUI is different from UIKit and the property wrappers. I have that one story to share. So a few months ago, I was building an app completely in SwiftUI. It was pretty basic app, nothing complex. It was just a player app with, you could like pick an item and you could play it, and there were some other details, like there was list, and when you click on it, it shows an image. Pretty basic stuff. And it was like a client app that my company was making, and I was responsible for it. So the app was completely built in SwiftUI, and I was so amazed. Like, wow, I could build all these in SwiftUI, so easy to use, like no trouble. Until, I mean, the thing was that the app needed to be pixel perfect, and now that is where I would say the SwiftUI part lacked. Like, they wanted like exact layout. Like this should be the padding. This should be how the spacing should be. Now, how will SwiftUI handle that? What basically, it's not like I could give something like I could give a left constraint and right constraint, give like that exact frame to it. It's all based on me giving a stack and a frame. Maybe I could go for a little further and use a geometry reader. But apart from that, I have no control over it. Like I can't be like this item has to be this much away from the screen or something. And around that time, I mean, that definitely didn't go. I wasn't able to build that pixel perfect view. So that one lesson I would say that don't go for Swift UI if you want like pixel perfect everything, like perfect animations and like a very clear navigation flow. Like Swift UI are definitely not that, like, not that ready that you could go for this perfect layout. So yes, that's one story I wanted to share. Uh, I guess this is the end of my presentation. And before that, I just want to say, if you all find any value out of it or what we are doing from our social media handles or from the things the articles we write on Swift Anytime or these sessions we conduct, and if you support it, feel free to go to the Hacking with Swift Community Awards. And in the Rising Star, we are nominated. So feel free to pick Swift Anytime there. Um, so I
Um,
guess this is the end of my presentation. Yes, Amit.
yeah, I was saying I would definitely vote Swift anytime.
Same here.
Sure. Though, we are open for any AMS you guys have. You can post out on Discord or the YouTube live stream chat, and we will be able to answer it on it right now.
Yes. So I guess this is the end of my presentation on Swift UI. Um, and just you could find us on SwiftAnytime.com and all our social media handles are Swift Anytime. You can find me on Rasi underscore and Amit on Amit Samant underscore dev. If you have any questions or any school stories to share about Swift UI, feel free to share that in the chat on YouTube or on the Discord channel. So
Okay. It was a nice session, Kanishka.
hope you all liked it.
Yeah.
So let's go for the chat. Okay, I was going through the chats and I guess people like it. We could do more in future, going more intermediate, more into the basics of like other property wrappers into combine and more into the layouts of SwiftUI.
Shoot out any recommendation you guys have for next upcoming sessions on SwiftUI or UIKit.
Yes. Uh, Also, just a icebreaker question again. What are your like weekend plans since it's another weekend and we don't even realize 3 months of 2022 passed. Like time is passing really fast.
Yeah, it is.
Integrating UIKit in SwiftUI. Yes, that's a great one.
Yeah, we'll pick it up. It's a good topic to have in session upon. It's
Yes.
really good that iOS SDK allow us
Nice
to
to interrupt in between, but we have got one comment on YouTube as well.
okay.
Let's check the UIKit versus SwiftUI animation comparison. Yeah, that's a nice one too. We are having this all in our upcoming list. We would like definitely keep more sessions like this based on like SwiftUI, UIKit stuff. Okay, I got this one on clear differences between classes and struct. Thanks. Also, waiting for tips to create pixel perfect UI Swift. I guess good to know that that coffee cup analogy cleared the classes versus struct thing. And yes, we could go for more pixel perfect stuff, but I don't think SwiftUI would allow us to go that far. The best we could do is use our geometry reader and all that stuff knowledge to go as far as possible.
Yeah, Ganesha, sorry for interrupting. So we have a question from Paul Hudson.
Wow.
Okay, so
Analogy cleared.
yeah, so WWDC isn't far away. If you could have one new feature in Swift UI, what would it be? What it would be for you?
Uh, I would say, I guess, the first thing that comes to my mind is navigation controller, something which eases the navigation controller like flow. So people not hesitant about using it in production. And I would say another thing is layout, better layout. Like we could lay out it in a better way. That those are the couple of things I would want.
Yeah, I would say if I kind of content with the features which I already have, but yeah, I would like to see more content from the doc team about how we can improve the performance of app created in SwiftUI, because we still don't know how SwiftUI renders the UI actually. So yeah, that part
Right.
makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So if we could have some tips over how we could improve the performance or demystifying SwiftUI, like how the render process actually works, so that would be really nice to have.
And I guess if that's not the case, there's always hacking with Swift, bringing the really fundamental and the best way to understand that.
Yeah,
Open source Swift UI.
yeah, must have thing. I mean, it's a really nice framework, and if someday, maybe in 5 or 6 years, it may become open source, then more people may be able to contribute to it. And the things that we are currently facing, like the issues that we face while developing the apps, which are not very visible to the framework team at Apple, it could be improved on a better way. So yeah, I mean, all in for the open source.
Yes. Um, okay. There are a lot of new like cool suggestions. Open source Swift UI. That would be great. Thanks for this session, guys. Please add more detailed topics in the next session. Definitely.
For sure.
Yes. So I guess with that, we are about to wrap up the session. It was so wonderful to have you on this Friday night. Like this is usually the time when people chill after the very tough week. But here we are, the hustlers, learning about the Swift UI fundamentals.
That's cool. Okay, guys. Though you can ask questions on the channel itself, we would be able to answer them in there. So yeah, thank. It was really nice to have you all guys on the session. Hope you like the sessions. Okay then.
Yep.
Meet you all next time. Bye bye.
Have a wonderful weekend.